He came to the mountains to outrun memories that had the persistence of wolves. Memories that hunted best in the quiet hours before dawn. Elias Thorne had once moved through a world of dust and noise, a world defined by the clipped language of command and the sharp metallic smell of purpose. Now, he sought its opposite. He sought a silence so profound it might starve the ghosts that followed him. The truck, a dented and loyal machine that asked for nothing but gas and oil, climbed the winding gravel road, spitting stones into the whispering pines. Each turn took him higher, further away from the flat, predictable grid of the life he had dismantled. Beside him, on the worn passenger seat, Ghost sat with the rigid posture of a professional. The German Shepherd was old, his muzzle a distinguished silver gray against the deep black and tan of his coat. He was not a pet. The word felt flimsy, inadequate. Ghost was a veteran, a partner, a silent witness to the same chapter of Elias's life that he was now trying to close. The dog's amber eyes watched the passing trees not with the simple joy of a canine companion, but with a deep, assessing stillness. He was, as always, on duty. His breathing was a slow, steady rhythm in the cab, a living metronome counting out their ascent into solitude. Elias parked the truck where the road dissolved into a mere suggestion of a trail. He cut the engine, and the silence he had been chasing rushed in to fill the void. It was not an empty silence. It was layered, textured, woven from the sigh of the wind through high branches, the distant chatter of a creek, and the immense, patient weight of the mountain itself. For a moment, the mountain held its breath, and Elias felt his own chest tighten in unconscious sympathy. He had been a man who read landscapes for threats, for ambush points and lines of sight. Now he was trying to learn a new language, one of peace. He swung his legs out of the cab, his worn leather boots landing softly on a carpet of pine needles. The air was cool, clean, and carried the scent of damp earth and resin. Elias shrugged on his olive field jacket, the fabric softened by years and countless washings. It was a second skin, a uniform for a war he now waged only with himself. He checked the military-issue watch on his wrist, a habit too deeply ingrained to break. Time moved differently here. It was not a thing to be beaten or managed, but a current to be surrendered to. Ghost hopped down from the truck, landing with a quiet thud that belied his age. He stood for a long moment, his head raised, nostrils twitching, reading the air with an expertise Elias could only envy. He was cataloging the scents of deer, of fox, of the turning leaves and the coming cold. Elias slung his Eberly stock half-track pack over his shoulders. It was loaded with everything he needed, and nothing he didn't. A small tent, a sleeping bag, freeze-dried meals, a water filter, a first aid kit. A life reduced to its essential components. It was a discipline he understood. They moved down the trail, man and dog, a single unit of quiet intention. Elias's stride was long and economical, a ghost of the forced marches and silent patrols that lived in his muscle memory. He held no map, only a compass and a sense of direction that was as much instinct as training. He was not going to a specific place. He was going away. The forest floor was a soft tapestry of moss and fallen leaves, muffling their footfalls. Sunlight, when it broke through the dense canopy, came in slanted golden shafts, illuminating dust motes and tiny insects in their frantic, silent dance. It was a cathedral of stillness, and for a few hours, Elias felt the tight knot in his chest begin to loosen. The memories receded, their voices drowned out by the rustle of a squirrel in the undergrowth or the cry of a hawk circling high above. He walked until the angle of the sun told him the afternoon was waning. He found a small, level clearing near a gurgling stream, a place that felt defensible by old habit and peaceful by new intention. He dropped his pack and began the familiar ritual of setting up camp. He worked with a fluid efficiency, his hands moving with a purpose that his mind often lacked. The tent went up, the sleeping bag was unrolled, a small fire pit was cleared. Ghost sat nearby, observing the process with an air of quiet judgment. Elias glanced at him, catching the dog's steady gaze. He sometimes felt Ghost was grading him, and that he was rarely earning top marks. A wry, internal smile touched Elias's thoughts. The dog seemed to find his attempt at a peaceful, civilian life a bit clumsy, a bit beneath the standards they had once maintained. "It'll hold," Elias said, his voice raspy from disuse. It was the first word he had spoken aloud all day. Ghost responded with a soft huff, lying down and placing his head on his paws, though his eyes remained open, scanning the perimeter of their small camp. He was never entirely at rest. Elias finished his tasks and settled against the trunk of a massive oak, pulling a small, battered notebook and a pen from his jacket pocket. He stared at the blank page for a long time. This was part of the ritual, the part that never got easier. He was supposed to write, to empty the things from his head onto the paper. But the words, like the memories, were tangled and sharp. He remembered another place, another kind of silence. The taut, humming silence before a breach. The dead silence after. He remembered the weight of a promise he had failed to keep. The face of a man he had been forced to leave behind. The memory pressed forward, cold and heavy. It came with the scent of cordite and dry, foreign dust. He closed his eyes. The pen felt impossibly heavy in his hand. Elias had spent years in places where the landscape was an enemy, where every shadow could hide a threat and every sound was a potential warning. He had learned to move against the grain of the world, to be an anomaly, a whisper of violence in a hostile quiet. This place, these mountains, were supposed to be different. He was trying to learn to move with the world, not against it. He was trying to unlearn the constant humming vigilance that kept him perpetually on edge. As dusk began to bleed through the trees, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft orange, Ghost, who had been a statue of calm, suddenly lifted his head. His ears swiveled, locking onto something Elias couldn't hear. His body went rigid. It was not the alert posture of a dog that had scented a deer or a rabbit. This was different. This was the coiled stillness Elias had seen 100 times before, the signal that something was profoundly out of place. Elias stopped breathing. He followed the dog's intense gaze, scanning the dense woods in the direction Ghost was focused. He saw nothing but the deepening shadows of the trees, the gentle sway of ferns and the evening breeze. He heard nothing but the creak and the wind. But he trusted the dog. Ghost's instincts were a finer, more reliable instrument than his own. The silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt watchful. It had teeth. Ghost didn't bark. He never barked without purpose. Instead, a low, almost inaudible rumble started deep in his chest. It was a sound that vibrated through the ground, a warning meant not for the unseen thing in the woods, but for Elias. Pay attention. Elias slowly, deliberately, placed his notebook back in his jacket. He didn't stand up, didn't make any sudden movements. He simply became what he had been for so long, a man listening to the world for a single, discordant note. The dog remained frozen for another minute, a perfect sculpture of predatory attention. Then, as if coming to a decision, he stood up. He did not look at Elias for a command. His movements were his own, driven by a certainty that superseded their established hierarchy. He began to move, not toward the unseen disturbance, but parallel to it, his body low to the ground, a dark shape flowing through the twilight. Elias rose silently to his feet, his brief moment of peace shattered. He left the camp as it was and followed the only guide he had ever truly trusted. The mountain was no longer a sanctuary. It was a question, and Ghost was leading him toward the answer. They moved through the gloaming, a man and a dog in silent accord. Ghost led him away from the creek, up a gentle slope covered in a thick carpet of moss that swallowed the sound of their passage. The air grew cooler, heavier. Elias felt the familiar prickle on the back of his neck, the heightened awareness that was both a curse and a gift of his former life. His senses sharpened, filtering the world into its core components, the texture of the bark on the trees he passed, the subtle shifts in the wind, the damp, loamy smell of the forest floor. Ghost stopped. He stood at the base of a rocky outcropping, a jagged spine of granite that thrust out of the mountainside like a broken bone. The dog's attention was fixed on a spot near the ground, where a thick tangle of ancient ivy clung to the stone. He whined softly, a sound of frustrated insistence. It was a sound Elias had not heard in years, a specific vocalization the dog used when he had located something hidden, something buried. Elias knelt beside him, running a hand down the dog's tense back. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Ghost nudged the ivy with his nose, then looked back at Elias, his eyes gleaming in the faint light. The message was clear. "Here." Elias pulled his folding knife from his pocket, the click of the blade locking into place unnaturally loud in the immense quiet. He began to cut away the thick, woody vines, peeling them back from the rock face. Behind the curtain of green, something was carved into the stone. It was not a natural formation. The lines were too straight, too deliberate. As he cleared more of the ivy, a shape began to emerge. The simple, unmistakable outline of a cross. It was old, weathered, covered in lichen, but it was undeniably man-made. Elias traced the shape with his fingers. The stone was cold, but he felt a strange current of warmth, a resonance, as if the carving held a faint, lingering echo of the hand that made it. Ghost was not satisfied. He began to paw at the ground just below the cross, his claws scraping against soil and loose stones. He was digging with a frantic energy, dirt flying behind him. Elias watched for a moment, then joined him, using his hands to clear the earth the dog was loosening. A few inches down, his fingers struck something hard, something that was not rock. It was wood, smooth and dark. Working together, they cleared the dirt away, revealing the top of a small wooden object. Elias brushed the last of the soil from its surface. It was a book, its cover made of thick, hand-carved planks of what looked like oak, bound together with leather straps. It was impossibly well preserved, the wood treated with some kind of wax or resin that had repelled the dampness of the earth. It felt less like an artifact and more like something that had been left only yesterday. He carefully lifted the book from its shallow grave. It was heavy, solid. The leather straps were brittle with age, but they held. He looked at Ghost, who had stopped digging and was now sitting, watching him with that same intense, knowing gaze. The dog had not found this by accident. Elias had the unsettling feeling that Ghost had been looking for it, or something like it, all along. He did not open the book. Not yet. The discovery of the cross and the buried book had changed the character of the land. This was not just wilderness. It was a place with a secret, a place with a history that had been deliberately concealed. His training took over, his mind automatically switching from contemplative wanderer to tactical observer. Who carved this cross? Who buried this book? And why? He scanned the area with new eyes. The rocky outcropping, which before had been a simple geological feature, now looked like a landmark, a marker. He stood up and walked its length, his eyes tracing the lines of the rock, looking for other signs, other anomalies. The forest was almost dark now, the shadows thick and impenetrable. He knew it was foolish to stay here, exposed, with a mystery in his hands. He needed the security of his camp, the clarity of daylight. He returned to Ghost, who was waiting patiently. Elias tucked the wooden book carefully inside his field jacket, the hard cover pressing against his ribs. It felt like a shield, or a burden. He wasn't sure which. "All right," he said softly. "Let's go back." They made their way back to the clearing, the small circle of firelight a welcome beacon in the encroaching night. Elias added more wood to the fire, the flames leaping up, pushing back the darkness. He sat with his back against the oak tree, the heavy book in his lap. Ghost lay nearby, his duty done. For now. The dog's breathing was the only sound that seemed to belong to the night. With careful fingers, Elias undid the leather straps. They crackled and threatened to break, but they gave way. He opened the wooden cover. The first page was not paper, but a thin, treated piece of vellum. Written in a precise, elegant hand was a single sentence. "We are not lost, for God knows the map of our hearts." He turned the page. The book was a journal, filled with dated entries in the same neat script. The ink was faded but perfectly legible. The first entry was dated over a century ago. Elias began to read, the firelight flickering across the pages, and the story of the hidden mountain began to unfold. It was not a story of a single person, but of a community. A small, devout group of families who had sought refuge in these mountains, seeking to build a life of quiet faith far from a world they felt had lost its way. The journal described the building of a church, not of stone and stained glass, but of living wood and mountain stone. It spoke of a congregation that worshipped in a place carved by God's own hand and consecrated by our labor. As Elias read, he realized the cross he had found was not just a marker, it was a cornerstone. And he had been camping on the doorstep of a lost sanctuary. He looked up from the journal, out into the darkness beyond the fire. The mountain was no longer just a place of escape. It was a place of memory, a repository of a forgotten faith. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the echoes of hymns he could almost hear carried on the wind. The weight in his jacket had been a burden. Now, holding the open journal, it felt like a responsibility. Ghost lifted his head, as if sensing the shift in Elias's thoughts. The dog had not just found a book, he had found a mission, and he had given it to Elias. The night passed in a series of waking dreams. Elias read the journal until the fire burned down to glowing embers and the moon was high in the sky. The words on the page painted a picture of a life that was both harsh and beautiful. The writer, a man named Jeremiah, chronicled the passing of seasons, the births and deaths, the struggles to farm the rocky soil, and the unwavering faith that held the small community together. He wrote of a place they called Sanctuary, a small chapel built into a natural cave system behind the rock face where Elias had found the cross. According to the journal, the entrance was concealed, known only to the members of the congregation. It was their sacred space, a heart of stillness within the wild mountain. The journal was filled with descriptions of the chapel, the way the morning light would strike a natural quartz vein in the rock, filling the space with a diffused golden glow. The altar carved from a single massive fallen pine, the pews made of split logs, sanded smooth by patient hands. It was a place built not with wealth, but with devotion. Elias fell into a fitful sleep just before dawn, the journal resting on his chest. He dreamt of stone and wood, of quiet hymns and resolute faces. He woke to the gray light of morning, the air sharp and cold. The first thing he saw was Ghost, sitting sentinel, watching him with an unnerving patience. The dog had not moved from his post all night. Elias rekindled the fire and made coffee, the simple, methodical process a comfort in the face of the monumental discovery. He felt a strange sense of trespass, as if he were an intruder in a story that was not his. But Ghost's certainty, the deliberate way the dog had led him here, felt like an invitation, a summons. He was no longer just a man running from his past. He was a man who had stumbled into someone else's. After a sparse breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, he packed a small day pack, water, a flashlight, his knife, and the journal. He left the tent and the rest of his gear in the clearing. He had to go back. He had to see if it was real. "Stay here, boy," he said to Ghost, a command born of habit. The dog simply looked at him, then stood up, ready to move. Elias sighed. Of course. This was Ghost's mission as much as it was his now. They returned to the rocky outcropping. In the clear morning light, the carved cross seemed even more stark, more intentional. Elias consulted the journal. Jeremiah's words were precise. To enter, one must not push, but pull. Find the stone that bears the mark of the shepherd's crook and ask it to yield. Elias scanned the rock face near the cross, his eyes tracing the natural cracks and fissures. His gaze fell upon a loose collection of stones at the base, looking like a natural rock slide. Among them was a single, oddly shaped stone, curved like a question mark. The shepherd's crook. He knelt and gripped the stone. It was heavy, but it shifted under his hands. It was not a loose rock. It was a lever. He pulled, and with a deep, grinding groan of stone against stone, a section of the rock face swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow opening. A wave of cool, musty air washed over him, smelling of deep earth, stone, and something else. Something ancient and reverent. He took out his flashlight, its powerful beam cutting into the darkness. The passage was narrow, sloping gently downward. Ghost, without hesitation, entered first, his paws making no sound on the stone floor. Elias followed, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The air grew colder, the silence more profound. After about 20 feet, the passage opened into a larger space. Elias swept the beam of his flashlight across the chamber, and his breath caught in his throat. It was exactly as the journal had described. A natural cave, but transformed. The walls were smooth, and a long, jagged vein of milky quartz ran across the ceiling. Simple, hand-carved pews were arranged in neat rows. At the far end, on a raised platform, stood an altar of dark, polished wood, its surface bare. It was a church, a perfect hidden chapel, preserved in the heart of the mountain like a secret in a locket. It was not dusty or filled with cobwebs. The air was still but clean. The floor was swept. There was a sense of maintenance, of recent care that defied the century of abandonment described in the journal. This place was not forgotten. It was being tended. He walked slowly down the central aisle, his boots echoing softly in the vast silence. Ghost moved to the front near the altar and lay down, as if he had returned to a familiar, rightful place. Elias ran his hand along the back of a pew. The wood was smooth, worn by countless hands. He could feel the history in it, the weight of all the prayers that had been offered in this hidden place. On the altar, he found the only object in the room. It was another book, larger than the journal, bound in the same dark leather. He opened it. It was a Bible, and on the inside cover, a list of names. Baptisms, marriages, deaths, the complete record of a lost congregation. He traced the names with his finger. Thorne, Miller, Shaw, Evans. The families who had built this sanctuary. Paragraph_paragraph. He spent hours in the chapel, reading through the second book, cross-referencing names and dates with the journal. The story became clearer and more tragic. The final entries in the journal, written by Jeremiah's son, spoke of a new threat. Not the hardship of winter or the failure of a crop, but a man from the outside world. A man from a railroad company who had come with maps and legal papers, claiming the mountain for his own. The community had been small, isolated, and their claims to the land were based on sweat and faith, not on deeds filed in a distant courthouse. The entries described a quiet, relentless campaign to drive them out. Fences were cut, livestock went missing, a barn was burned in the night. The threats were never overt, always deniable. The last entry was short, desperate. They say the law is on their side. They have given us 1 week to abandon our homes, our church, our lives. We will seal the sanctuary and pray that God will keep it safe until a just soul finds it again. We will not be forgotten. A cold anger settled in Elias's chest. This was not just a story of a lost community. It was a story of an injustice, a theft. A people had been systematically erased from their own land, their history buried along with their faith. The pristine condition of the chapel suddenly made a new kind of sense. Someone had been coming back. Someone had been keeping the promise. A descendant, perhaps, secretly tending the flame. He found one last thing. Tucked into the back of the large Bible was a folded, yellowed piece of paper. It was a surveyor's map, hand-drawn. It showed the parcel of land the community had claimed, with the location of the chapel marked by a simple cross. At the bottom, another name was written, next to the title, Company Surveyor. Alastair Finch. And beside it, a note from the journal's last author. He was a good man. He tried to warn us. The name hit Elias like a physical blow. Finch. It was the name of the man he had failed to save on his last mission. Sergeant Michael Finch. A young, idealistic soldier who had bled out in Elias's arms while they waited for a medevac that came too late. Elias had made a choice that day. A tactical decision to hold a position rather than risk a secondary ambush by moving Finch. He had chosen the mission over the man. It was the memory that hunted him, the ghost he could not outrun. He sank onto one of the pews, the map trembling in his hand. This couldn't be a coincidence. The name, this place, this story of a good man trying to do the right thing against a powerful, faceless entity. It felt like a message sent across a century, a convergence of past and present that was too specific to be chance. He looked at Ghost, who was watching him with his head cocked, as if he understood the weight of the moment. The dog had not just led him to a church, he had led him to a reckoning. The responsibility he felt was no longer a vague sense of duty. It was personal. He owed a debt to the name Finch. He had failed one man who bore it. He would not fail this forgotten community or the memory of the good surveyor who had tried to save them. The decision settled in him, solid and clear. He would not let this story remain buried. He would be the just soul the last journal writer had prayed for. The past had finally caught up to him, not as a predator, but as a plea. And this time, he would not turn away. If this chapter of a man's journey into a past he tried to escape has stirred something in you, if you feel the weight of memory and the call to an unexpected purpose, then take a moment to like, share, and leave a comment below. The world is full of quiet places and forgotten stories, waiting for a faithful heart to find them. Sometimes the Lord doesn't ask us to run from our ghosts, but to turn and face them, finding our own redemption in the process. Subscribe to our channel so we can continue to explore these moments where faith and courage intersect in the lives of ordinary people. Sometimes the Lord asks us to stay and listen. The descent from the mountain was different from the ascent. Before, Elias had been moving away from something. Now, he was moving toward it. The truck felt less like an escape vehicle and more like a tool. He drove with a renewed sense of purpose, the journal and the map secured in his pack on the passenger seat. Ghost sat in his usual spot, but his posture seemed different, less like a guard and more like a partner in a shared endeavor. He drove to the nearest town, a small, sleepy place called Harmony Creek, nestled in the valley below the mountain range. It was a town that seemed to have been bypassed by the rush of the modern world. The main street was lined with brick buildings from the turn of the last century, their facades bearing the faded names of businesses long since gone. He parked in front of a squat, formidable building of gray stone, the Sheridan County Courthouse. He walked up the wide, worn steps and through the heavy oak doors. The inside smelled of old paper, floor wax, and time. A sign pointed him toward the county clerk's office. He found it at the end of a long, quiet hallway. The office was a small room, lined floor to ceiling with massive leather-bound record books. Behind a tall wooden counter sat a woman who looked as though she were a part of the building itself. She was tall and spare, her hair a steel gray bun pinned with severe precision. She wore simple, no-nonsense spectacles and looked at him over the top of them as he approached. Her expression was neither friendly nor unfriendly. It was a look of neutral competence, of a woman who had seen every kind of local drama and was impressed by none of it. This had to be the female authority figure, the gatekeeper. "Can I help you?" Her voice was crisp, efficient. "I hope so," Elias said, his own voice feeling rough in the quiet room. "I'm looking for old land records, survey maps, deeds, from around the late 1800s. She raised an eyebrow, a subtle movement that conveyed a world of skepticism. "That's a broad request. This county is large. What parcel are you interested in?" Elias hesitated. He couldn't just say the haunted mountain with the secret church. He needed to be methodical. He pulled the hand-drawn map from his pocket and carefully unfolded it on the counter. "This area here," he said, pointing to the section marked with the cross. "It would be on the north slope of what's now called Black Ridge." The woman leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. She studied the old map, her expression unreadable. She traced the lines with a long, slender finger. "This is a private survey, not an official county map," she stated, not as a question but as a fact. "And the landmarks are based on names I don't recognize. Jeremiah's Peak, Faithful Creek." "I know," Elias said. "I'm trying to find the official records that correspond to this piece of land." She looked from the map to his face, her gaze sharp, analytical. She was taking his measure. She saw the field jacket, the disciplined posture, the weariness in his eyes. "My name is Martha Riley," she said, her tone softening almost imperceptibly. "I've been the clerk here for 37 years. I know these books better than I know my own family. If a record exists, I can find it. But you'll need to give me more than a folk map." Elias thought for a moment. He had to give her something, a thread to pull on. "The name of the surveyor was Alistair Finch," he said. "He was working for a railroad company." The name seemed to unlock something in her memory. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Finch," she repeated. "And the railroad. That would be the Allegheny and Western Expansion Project. They bought up half the county in the 1880s, caused a lot of trouble." She turned and ran her finger along the spines of the massive books on the shelf behind her. She stopped, her finger resting on a thick, dark green volume. "Let's see what the official record says." She heaved the book from the shelf with a practiced strength and laid it on the counter with a heavy thud that echoed in the quiet office. Dust motes danced in the light. She opened it, the old pages crackling. She flipped through sections with a speed that spoke of long familiarity, her finger running down columns of spidery script. "Here we are," she said after a few minutes. "Black Ridge. Parcels sold to the A&W Railroad, 1888. She scanned the page. "It's all here. Dozens of parcels, all purchased for pennies on the dollar. The company claimed the land was undeveloped, unowned." "It wasn't," Elias said, his voice low. "There was a community there." Martha looked up at him, her gaze holding his. "There were rumors," she said quietly. "Stories my grandmother used to tell. About the mountain people. Said they just vanished. Most folks assumed they just moved on, went west." "They were forced out," Elias said. He laid the journal on the counter next to the ledger. "This tells their story." Martha looked at the hand-carved wooden book, her professional neutrality finally giving way to open curiosity. She reached out a hand, then hesitated. "What is that?" "It's a journal," Elias said. "From one of the founders of the community. I found it on the mountain." She was silent for a long time, her eyes moving from the journal to the map to the open ledger with its cold, legal script. The two books, lying side by side, told two different versions of the same history. One was a story of faith and community, the other a story of commerce and law. And one had erased the other. "The Allegheny and Western Railroad doesn't exist anymore," Martha said, her voice regaining its practical edge. "It was absorbed a dozen times over. The land rights would have been passed down. Today that land is owned by a holding company, a corporate entity called the Ridgelight Development Group." She looked at him pointedly. "They have a new project slated to begin up there, a luxury resort and golf course. They're scheduled to break ground in a week." A cold dread washed over Elias. A week. The timeline from the journal was repeating itself. He wasn't just fighting a historical injustice, he was racing against a bulldozer. "They're going to destroy it all," he said. "The chapel. Everything." Martha closed the heavy ledger. The sound was final, a gavel falling. "According to this office and the laws of this state, they have every right to," she said. Her face was grim. "Their deed is legal. Their title is clear." She paused, then leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping. "But legal doesn't always mean right, does it?" She looked at the old journal again. "You need more than a story. You need proof that this community had a prior claim, a legal claim. Without that, this book is just folklore." She straightened up, her professional mask back in place. "There's a man you should talk to, Samuel Blackwood. He's the town historian. Knows more about this county's forgotten corners than anyone."
If anyone can help you make sense of that map and find the proof you need, it's him.
She wrote a name and an address on a small slip of paper and pushed it across the counter. "He lives just outside of town. Don't be put off by his manner. He's passionate." Elias took the paper. "Thank you, Martha." "I haven't done anything," she said. But as he turned to leave, she added, "That journal, the story it tells, it deserves to be heard." It was as close to an endorsement as a woman like Martha Riley would ever come. Samuel Blackwood lived in a small, cluttered house overflowing with books, maps, and artifacts. He was a small, wiry man in his 70s with a wild mane of white hair and eyes that burned with a fierce intelligence. He greeted Elias at the door with a suspicious squint, his house a dragon's hoard of historical knowledge.
Elias explained his purpose simply, laying the journal and the map on the only clear surface in the room, a large oak table covered in topographical charts.
Samuel's suspicion immediately evaporated, replaced by an electric excitement. He picked up the journal as if it were a holy relic, his hands trembling slightly. "My God," he whispered, his voice raspy with awe. "I've been searching for this for 40 years. He looked at Elias, his eyes wide. The sanctuary. The lost congregation. It's real. I always knew it was real." For the next several hours, Samuel was a whirlwind of motion and information. He pulled books from shelves, unrolled ancient maps, and talked non-stop, weaving together the threads of history Elias had uncovered with his own decades of research. He confirmed Martha's story about the railroad and the rumors of the vanished community.
"The Alleghenian Western was ruthless," Samuel said, pacing his small living room.
"They used a combination of legal loopholes and intimidation. They had the law, the money, and the government on their side. A small, pacifist religious community wouldn't have stood a chance." He stopped and pointed a gnarled finger at the hand-drawn map. "But this is the key. Alastair Finch." Samuel scurried to a filing cabinet and pulled out a dusty folder. Finch was a junior surveyor on the project, a man of conscience from what I could gather. He resigned his position abruptly in 1888. The official reason was ill health. I always suspected there was more to it. He laid out another map, an official survey map from the railroad company, signed by a different surveyor. "This is the map that was filed with the county. It shows the land as empty." He then placed Elias's map beside it. "But your map, Finch's map, shows the homesteads, the farms, the church. He documented them."
"This is proof that the railroad company knew the community was there. They knew, and they lied."
A spark of hope ignited in Elias. "So this is the proof Martha was talking about?" Samuel's expression sobered. "It's proof of a moral crime, yes. But a legal one, that's harder. The community never filed a formal deed. In the eyes of the law at the time, they were squatters. What Finch's map proves is fraud on the part of the railroad. It proves they willfully misrepresented the state of the land to acquire it." He tapped the map. "The problem is, who do you take this to? The railroad is gone. Ridgelight Development is its legal successor, but they'll claim ignorance. They'll say they bought the land in good faith." Elias felt his hope begin to fade. "So it's useless?" "No," Samuel said, his eyes gleaming again. "Not useless. Just incomplete." He leaned over the table, his face close to Elias's. "There's a legend, a final piece of the puzzle."
The story goes that when the community was forced to leave, their leader, Jeremiah, didn't just bury the journal. He buried a charter.
"A charter?" Elias asked. "Yes. Before they came to the mountain, the community had been granted a charter of religious sanctuary by the state governor. It granted them title to whatever unclaimed land they settled, so long as they used it for religious and agricultural purposes. It was an old, archaic law, but it was legally binding. If that charter exists, and if it was buried with their records on that mountain, then their claim predates the railroads. It would mean that Ridgelight Development's title is null and void." Samuel gripped Elias's arm, his intensity startling. "The journal you found is their story. Finch's map is the evidence of the crime. But the charter is their resurrection." The path forward was clear. He had to go back to the chapel. He had to find the charter.
He looked at Samuel, a man who had dedicated his life to a story no one else believed. Where would they have hidden it? Samuel pointed to the journal in Elias's hand. The answer, my friend, is in there. Jeremiah wrote that he was sealing the sanctuary, but he also wrote, "We will leave our claim in the heart of our faith, protected by stone and spirit." The heart of their faith. The altar. The drive back up the mountain was a race against time. Elias pushed the truck as fast as the gravel road would allow. The conversation with Samuel had given him a target, a tangible goal. Find the charter. But Martha's words echoed in his mind. 1 week. He didn't know how much of that week was left. He parked the truck and moved quickly up the trail, Ghost loping easily ahead of him. The dog seemed to sense the urgency, his usual steady pace quickening. They reached the rock face, and Elias pulled open the hidden stone door.
He entered the chapel, his flashlight beam cutting through the sacred dark. He went straight to the altar. It was a massive piece of wood, looking as if it were rooted in the stone floor. He ran his hands over its surface, searching for a seam, a lock, a hidden compartment. He found nothing. It was solid, immovable. "Protected by stone and spirit," Samuel had quoted. Elias stepped back, frustrated. He swept his light over the altar again. It was carved from a single enormous pine log set upon a base of fitted stones. The stone base. Protected by stone. He knelt and examined the stonework. It was masterful, the stones fitted together without any visible mortar. He pushed against them, but they were solid. He sat back on his heels, his mind racing. He thought of his own training. How do you hide something in plain sight? You make it look like it belongs. You make it part of the structure. He looked at the front of the altar base. One stone, right in the center, was different. It was lighter in color, a piece of granite among the darker slate, and it bore a simple, faint carving. It was the same symbol from the rock face outside. A cross. He pressed his hands against it. It didn't move. He tried to pry at the edges with his knife, but there was no purchase. He stood up, circling the altar, his frustration mounting. He felt like he was failing, the weight of his past failures pressing down on him. He had failed Finch. Now he was failing his ancestor. He stopped, his back to the altar, and leaned against it, breathing heavily. He looked out at the empty pews, at the silent, expectant dark. He thought of the faith that had built this place. It wasn't a faith of force, but of patience, of quiet belief. One must not push, but pull, the journal had said about the entrance. He had been trying to force a solution. He turned back to the altar. He looked at the cross-marked stone again. He didn't push. He didn't pry. He simply laid his hands on it, as if in prayer. And then he remembered the rest of the instruction for the outer door. Ask it to yield. It was a password of faith, not of mechanics. What was the heart of their faith? He thought of the first line in the journal. We are not lost, for God knows the map of our hearts. It was a statement of profound trust. He looked at the cross, the universal symbol of sacrifice and redemption. He thought about his own journey here, the impossible coincidence of the name Finch, the debt he felt he owed. This was his chance at redemption. He pressed the center of the carved cross, not with force, but with a steady, intentional pressure. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the stone gave way, sinking inward an inch. A low, grinding sound followed, and the entire stone base of the altar slowly pivoted to the side, revealing a hollow cavity beneath. There, nestled on a bed of dry moss, was a cylindrical metal container, sealed with wax. Elias reached in and lifted it out. It was heavy, solid. He carried it to one of the pews and sat down, his hands shaking slightly. He broke the wax seal and twisted the lid. It came off with a soft hiss of air. Inside, rolled into a tight scroll, was a thick parchment document. He carefully unrolled it. It was covered in elaborate official script bearing the seal of the state governor, dated 1872. It was the charter, a legally binding document granting the congregation of the sanctuary title to 1 square mile of unclaimed land on Black Ridge for as long as it was used for the purpose of worship and sustenance. He had it. The proof. The resurrection. He sat there for a long time, the charter in his hands, the weight of a century of silence finally lifted. Ghost came and rested his head on Elias's knee, a quiet affirmation. The mission was complete. Or so he thought. As he stood up to leave, a sound from outside the chapel broke the stillness. A voice. Not Samuel's, not Martha's, a calm, polite voice that did not belong on this mountain. Remarkable, the voice said. Truly remarkable. Elias froze. He turned toward the entrance. A man was standing there, silhouetted against the daylight. He was in his late 40s, dressed not in hiking gear, but in a tailored blazer, expensive trousers, and clean, polished shoes. He held a high-powered flashlight, its beam intersecting with Elias's. He was smiling, a thin, placid smile that did not reach his eyes. I must admit, the man said, taking a step into the chapel. I didn't believe the rumors. A secret church in a cave. It sounded a bit fanciful. But here it is. Elias instinctively moved to place himself between the man and the altar, the charter clutched in his hand. Ghost rose to his feet, a low growl starting in his chest. The dog didn't like this man. Elias didn't either. Who are you? Elias asked, his voice flat, controlled. My name is Jennings, the man said, his smile unwavering. I'm with the Ridgelight Development Group, and I believe you found something that belongs to us. His eyes were fixed on the charter in Elias's hand. The polite antagonist had arrived. The confrontation had begun. Jennings took another step into the sacred space, his expensive shoes scuffing on the stone floor. The sound was a desecration. He shone his flashlight around the chapel, his expression one of detached, clinical appraisal, like a butcher inspecting a side of beef. So this is it, Jennings mused, his voice echoing slightly in the chamber. The legend Samuel Blackwood has been chasing for decades. I have to say it's more impressive than I imagined. The craftsmanship is quaint. The word was a dismissal, a calculated insult to the generations of faith that had smoothed the wooden pews and carved the stone. Elias stood his ground, the charter held firmly in his left hand. His right hand rested on Ghost's back, a silent command for the dog to hold. The low growl in Ghost's chest deepened, a subterranean rumble of pure animosity. The dog had made his judgment, and it was absolute. This land, and everything on it, belongs to a community that was driven off it, Elias said, his voice as cold and hard as the cave walls. Jennings chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. A community of squatters, you mean? According to every legal document in the Sheridan County Courthouse, this land was uninhabited when the Allegheny and Western Railroad acquired it. My company, as their legal successor, holds a clear and indisputable title. He gestured toward the charter in Elias's hand. That document, whatever it is a historical curiosity, nothing more. It's a state-issued charter, Elias countered, his gaze unwavering. It predates the railroad's claim. It proves their title was acquired through fraud. Jennings's smile tightened, the first crack in his polished facade. An interesting theory.
one you are welcome to pursue in court, a process that will take years and a fortune you do not possess. By which time my company's resort will be completed, and this charming little cave will be a service tunnel for the golf course's irrigation system." The threat was delivered with the same calm politeness as the rest of his speech, which only made it more menacing. He was not here to debate history. He was here to erase it. Elias felt the old anger, the familiar rage at injustice rising in him. But he kept it locked down. Rage was a liability. He had learned that the hard way. He needed to be cold, methodical. "You knew about this place," Elias stated. It wasn't a question. "You didn't just follow me up here." "Let's just say Mr. Blackwood is a bit too passionate for his own good," Jennings said smoothly. "He talks."
And in a small town, people listen. When I heard the town historian was meeting with a mysterious stranger who had found a miracle on the mountain, I thought it prudent to investigate. My company has a significant investment to protect. He took another step closer. He was now only 10 feet away. "So, here we are. You have a piece of paper. I have a team of lawyers and a fleet of bulldozers. I'm a practical man, Mr. Thorne. I'm sure you are too." The use of his name startled Elias for a fraction of a second. He had told no one his name, not Martha, not Samuel. Jennings had done his homework. He knew who Elias was. He was trying to intimidate him, to remind him that he was an outsider, a transient with a troubled past that could easily be brought to light. "I'm offering you a simple, clean solution," Jennings continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "That document is a complication, an unfortunate piece of historical litter. It would be better for everyone if it simply disappeared. For your troubles, my company would be prepared to offer a generous finder's fee, a token of our appreciation. Let's say $50,000. Cash. You could be on a beach in Mexico by the end of the week. Forget this mountain, forget this whole affair." The offer hung in the air, obscene and sacrilegious in the hallowed space. He was trying to buy the soul of this place. He was trying to buy Elias's complicity, to make him a partner in the very crime he was trying to expose. Elias thought of Sergeant Finch, of the promise he had failed to keep. He thought of the desperate final entry in the journal, the prayer for a just soul. This was the test. The same kind of moral compromise that had haunted him for years, now presented in a tailored suit with a polite smile. He gave his answer without speaking a word. He carefully, deliberately, rolled the charter back into its scroll and slid it back into the metal container. He sealed the lid. It was not for sale. Jennings's smile finally vanished completely, replaced by a mask of cold annoyance. "I see," he said, his voice losing its silken edge. "You're choosing to be difficult. I was hoping to avoid that." He looked past Elias at the chapel itself. "You know, it's a shame. This place has a certain integrity. It would be a pity to see it damaged." He looked back at Elias. "Accidents happen on construction sites, especially in remote, unstable geology like this. A small, targeted demolition charge to clear some rock for a foundation. Who knows what might collapse?" The threat was no longer veiled. He was threatening to destroy the chapel, to bring the mountain down on top of it, burying the secret forever. Ghost could feel the shift. The dog's growl escalated into a quiet, menacing snarl, the corner of his lip lifting to expose a long, white canine tooth. It was the final warning. Jennings took an involuntary step back, his eyes darting to the dog. For the first time, A flicker of genuine fear showed on his face. He was a man accustomed to fighting with contracts and lawyers, not with something so primal, so incorruptible. "Call off your dog," he said, his voice tight. "He's a good judge of character," Elias replied, his voice dangerously quiet. A tense standoff ensued. The only sounds were Ghost's low snarl and the distant drip of water somewhere deeper in the cave. Jennings was a man used to being in control, and he was rapidly losing it. The situation was no longer a negotiation. It had become a confrontation of wills. "This isn't over, Thorm," Jennings said, regaining a sliver of his composure. He began to back away toward the entrance. "You can't stay up here forever. My crews will be here on Monday morning, with or without your cooperation, and they will have security." He reached the entrance and paused in the daylight. "You've made a mistake. You should have taken the money." Then he was gone. The sunlight that streamed through the entrance seemed brighter, cleaner, without his silhouette blocking it. Elias let out a long, slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He ran a hand over Ghost's head, and the dog's snarl subsided, though his body remained tense. The confrontation was over, for now, but the war had just begun. He had 3 days. Monday morning. He looked at the sealed container in his hand. He had the truth, but Jennings had the power. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't fight Jennings's crew of bulldozers and security guards. He had to get the charter into the right hands. He had to get it to Martha Riley. But he couldn't just walk off the mountain. Jennings would be watching. He would expect Elias to go to the authorities. He would be waiting for him. Elias was a man trained in asymmetric warfare. He knew how to fight a larger, better-equipped enemy. You don't meet them head-on. You use the terrain. You use the element of surprise, and you create a diversion. He looked around the silent chapel. This place was his only ally. He had to protect it, and he had to use it. He spent the next hour preparing. He found a small, deep alcove in the chapel wall, hidden behind a natural rock formation. He placed the metal cylinder containing the charter inside, covering it with loose stones until it was completely concealed. The charter was safe. Now he needed a decoy. He took out his battered notebook, the one he carried to exercise his own ghosts. He tore out a dozen pages. He found a small, hollowed-out piece of bamboo near the cave entrance, probably left by a previous visitor. He rolled the blank pages and placed them inside, creating a crude replica of the charter's container. It wouldn't stand up to close inspection, but it might work as a diversion. His plan was simple and dangerous. He would make a run for it tonight, under the cover of darkness. He would let Jennings's people see him, let them chase him. He would lead them away from the mountain, away from the chapel. It was a risk. He would be alone, and they would be expecting him. But it was the only way to draw their fire, to ensure the real charter remained secure until he could create an opportunity to retrieve it and get it to town. As dusk fell, a storm began to gather over the peaks. The sky turned a dark, bruised gray, and the wind picked up, howling through the trees. It was perfect. The storm would provide cover, masking his sound and movement. It was a gift from the mountain. He stood at the entrance of the chapel, the bamboo decoy tucked into his jacket. The storm was breaking, rain lashing down, lightning splitting the sky. Ghost stood beside him, his body a taut line of energy. He was ready. "This is it, boy," Elias whispered. "One last run." He took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of rain and ozone, and plunged out into the storm. He moved quickly, using the flashes of lightning to navigate the treacherous terrain. He didn't head for the trail to his truck. That would be too obvious. Instead, he moved east, along the ridge, deliberately choosing a more difficult path. He wanted them to follow. He didn't have to wait long. A pair of powerful flashlight beams cut through the rain behind him. They had been waiting. Two men, dressed in dark rain gear, were closing in. They were moving fast, confidently. They were professionals. Jennings hadn't just hired security. He had hired trackers. A grim chase began across the stormy ridge. Elias used every bit of his training, every trick of evasion he had ever learned. He moved through the thickest undergrowth, used the terrain to break their line of sight, doubled back on his own trail. But they were good. They stayed with him, relentless. The storm intensified, the wind tearing at him, the rain turning the ground into a slick, treacherous mud. A brilliant fork of lightning struck a massive pine tree 100 yards away. The crack of thunder instantaneous and deafening. The tree exploded in a shower of splinters and flame. The chaos was his ally. He scrambled down a steep, rocky embankment, using the temporary blindness from the lightning flash to gain some distance. At the bottom, he found himself in a narrow ravine, a seasonal creek, now a raging torrent of brown water. He plunged into the icy water, the current pulling at him, and made his way to the other side. He hoped the water would mask his scent from any dogs they might be using. As he pulled himself up the muddy bank on the other side, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. A sharp yelp of pain. It was Ghost. He looked back across the churning water. The two men were at the top of the embankment he had just descended. And Ghost was there, between them and the ravine. The dog had not followed him into the water. He had stayed behind, creating a rear guard, holding them back. One of the men was nursing his hand. Ghost had bitten him. The other man raised something in his hand. It was a collapsible baton. He swung it viciously. The baton connected with Ghost's side with a sickening thud. The dog cried out again, stumbling but not falling. He turned, teeth bared, ready to lunge again, to defend the retreat of the man he was sworn to protect. Elias froze. Everything stopped. The roaring wind, the lashing rain, the thunder, all of it faded into a dull background hum. He saw the scene with a terrible, crystalline clarity. His partner, his friend, injured and alone, facing two enemies. And he was on the wrong side of the river. The memory hit him, not as a whisper but as a roar. The dust, the smoke, the shouting. Sergeant Finch, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock and pain. Finch, looking at him, pleading. And Elias making the call. We hold this position. We can't move him. He had chosen the mission. He had chosen the objective. He had let his partner die. Now the universe was presenting him with the same choice, dressed in a different uniform. The mission was to get the decoy away, to lead the trackers on a wild goose chase, to protect the charter. The mission was on this side of the river. His partner was on the other. He saw the second man raise the baton again. In that instant, something inside Elias broke, or maybe it healed. He made the choice. He did not hesitate. He plunged back into the raging torrent, fighting the current, his mind focused on one single objective. Not the charter, not the church, not the mission. Ghost. He surged out of the water on the other side, a primal roar tearing from his throat. He was no longer a soldier executing a tactical plan. He was a man fighting for his family. He hit the first man like a freight train, his shoulder driving into the man's chest, sending him flying backward into the mud. The second man, surprised by the sudden, ferocious counterattack, swung the baton at Elias's head. Elias ducked under it, the baton whistling past his ear. He drove his fist into the man's stomach, a short, brutal jab that knocked the wind out of him. The man doubled over, gasping. Elias grabbed the baton from his hand and threw it into the darkness.
He stood over the two men, breathing heavily, rain plastering his hair to his face. He was a terrifying figure, a force of nature unleashed. The two trackers, hired muscle used to intimidating civilians, wanted no more of this. They scrambled to their feet and retreated into the storm, melting back into the woods. Elias didn't pursue them. He turned to Ghost. The dog was standing, but his back leg was trembling, and he was favoring his side. Elias knelt, running his hands gently over the dog's body, checking for broken bones. He found a deep bruise on his ribs, but nothing seemed to be broken. Ghost licked his hand, his breathing labored. Elias looked at the bamboo tube that had fallen from his jacket during the fight. The decoy. The mission he had abandoned. He felt no regret. He had made the right choice. He had stayed. For the first time in years, the face of Sergeant Finch appeared in his memory not with an accusation, but with something that felt like approval. The tide had turned. Not because he had won a fight, but because he had chosen loyalty. As he helped the limping Ghost back toward the sanctuary of the cave, he saw a flicker of light near where his truck was parked. It wasn't the trackers. It was a different light. Headlights. A vehicle was coming up the mountain road. Jennings was escalating. But something else was happening too. One of the trackers, the younger one, the one Elias had hit first, had seen the whole thing. He had seen a man abandon his own escape and charge back across a raging river to save his dog. He had seen something that day that his paycheck couldn't cover. And as he retreated, he had pulled out a satellite phone and made a call. Not to his boss, but to the county clerk's office, leaving an anonymous, cryptic message about a man needing help on Black Ridge. The headlights Elias saw were not Jennings's men. It was the county sheriff, responding to a call from a very insistent Martha Riley. The turning of the tide had begun, not with a grand battle, but with a small act of moral courage and a choice to save a friend. The morning after the storm was unnaturally calm. A thick mist clung to the mountainside, muffling all sound, turning the forest into a place of ghosts and whispers. Elias sat just inside the entrance of the hidden chapel, tending to Ghost. He had cleaned the wound on the dog's side and wrapped it with bandages from his first aid kit. Ghost was resting, his breathing still shallow, but his eyes were clear. He had not left Elias's side all night. Elias had not slept. He had spent the long hours waiting, listening. He had retrieved the real charter from its hiding place. It sat beside him now, a silent testament to the choice he had made. He had failed the tactical mission, abandoning the decoy and revealing his position. But he had won the war inside himself. Whatever happened next, he felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. The heavy weight of his past had not vanished, but it had shifted, become something he could carry. Just after dawn, he heard the sound of approaching vehicles. Not the aggressive rumble of construction equipment, but the steady, official purr of Sheriff's Department cruisers. He stood up, helping Ghost to his feet. It was time to face the consequences. Two deputies appeared at the rock face, their weapons drawn. They saw Elias standing there, not as a threat, but as a man waiting. Behind them, Martha Riley emerged from the mist. She was not dressed in her office attire, but in practical boots and a heavy-duty raincoat. She looked at Elias, then at the injured dog beside him, and her stern face softened with something that looked like respect. "We got a call," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet morning air. "Said a man was in trouble up here. Said you were protecting something." Elias simply nodded and handed her the metal cylinder. "The charter," he said. Martha took it, her expression grim. She looked from the cylinder to Elias. "Jennings is at the base of the mountain with his crew. The sheriff is holding him there, for now. He's claiming you assaulted his men." "They injured my dog," Elias said, the statement carrying the weight of a full explanation. Martha's gaze fell on Ghost's bandaged side. She understood. The deputies who took the report from his men said their story was inconsistent. They seemed more scared than hurt. She turned the cylinder over in her hands. Is this what I think it is? It's their resurrection, Elias said, echoing Samuel's words.
The hours that followed were a blur of quiet, official activity. Martha, holding the charter, became a force of nature. She made calls, citing obscure state historical preservation laws and land grant statutes that even the sheriff had never heard of. Samuel Blackwood arrived, his eyes wild with vindication, and immediately began authenticating the document. The site was declared a potential state historical landmark, placing an immediate and indefinite halt on all of Ridgelight's activities. Elias watched from the sidelines as the system he had so little faith in slowly began to work. Jennings was seen arguing, his polite mask stripped away to reveal the snarling frustration beneath. But his power, derived from clear titles and legal loopholes, was useless against the unassailable truth of the charter. He was a man with a deed to a house that, it turned out, had never been for sale. By midday, he and his crew were gone. The mountain was quiet again. Later that afternoon, as Elias was packing his camp, another vehicle made its way up the mountain road. This one was not a police cruiser. It was a small, sensible sedan. A woman got out. She was younger than Elias, with the same dark hair and a familiar, determined set to her jaw. His sister Sarah. He had called her. In the quiet hours before dawn, after he had tended to Ghost, he had used his satellite phone to make the first call to her in over 2 years. He hadn't explained everything. He had just said he was in a bit of trouble, but that he was all right. He had said he was sorry. It was enough. She had driven 6 hours without asking another question. She walked up to him, her eyes taking in the scene, the worn-out tent, the field jacket, the weary but calm look on his face, the injured dog at his side. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't ask why he had disappeared. She just looked at him, her expression a mixture of relief and worry.
"I see you've made a new friend," she said, her voice gentle as she looked at Ghost. "He's an old friend," Elias corrected softly. She reached out and squeezed his arm. A simple, grounding touch. "You look different," she said. "Tired, but lighter." "I feel lighter," he admitted. It was the truest thing he had said in years. They stood in silence for a moment, the unspoken history between them vast, but no longer a chasm. It was a distance that could now be crossed. "Come home, Eli," she said. "Just for a while. Mom asks about you." He looked up at the mountain, at the rock face that hid the secret chapel. He thought of the promise he had kept, the debt he had repaid to a ghost named Finch. He had come here to run away, but he had found a reason to stay. I think I am home," he said. He wasn't talking about his sister's house. He was talking about this place, this mountain, this new sense of purpose. Martha and Samuel approached him as Sarah was preparing to leave.
The historian was practically vibrating with joy.
"It's magnificent, Elias. The state is fast-tracking the preservation order. They're talking about turning the entire area into a protected historical site. The sanctuary will be safe forever." Martha was more pragmatic. "They'll need a warden," she said, looking at him pointedly. "Someone to live on the land, to protect it. Someone who knows the mountain and understands what this place means." It wasn't an offer. It was a request. Elias looked at Ghost, who was now sitting up, his tail giving a slow, steady thump against the ground. He looked at the peaceful, mist-shrouded peaks. He had spent half his life in service of missions he had come to question. Here was a mission that was pure, clear, and just. To be a guardian, to be a keeper of a quiet faith. He nodded. I think I'd like that. A week later, Elias stood on the porch of a small, rustic cabin that came with his new position as warden of the Black Ridge Historical Preserve.
It was located just a few miles from the chapel, with a clear view of the mountain peak. His old tent and gear were stored away. He had a home now, a real one. His olive field jacket hung on a peg by the door, a relic of a life that felt like it belonged to another man. Ghost lay on the porch beside him, his side now healing, his silvered muzzle resting on his paws. He was, for the first time Elias could remember, truly off-duty. His breathing was deep and even, the rhythm of a dog at peace. Elias held his old military-issue watch in his hand. He looked at its scratched face, the luminous hands still marking the relentless, precise passage of seconds. For years he had lived by this time. Mission time, tactical time, time measured in objectives and deadlines. He unclasped the watch from his wrist. With a final look, he placed it on the porch railing, a small, dark shape against the vast mountain landscape. He no longer needed to measure his life in seconds. He was on mountain time now. The sun was setting, casting a golden, forgiving light across the ridge. He looked toward the hidden chapel, a place of stone and spirit. He had come to the mountains seeking silence and had found a story. He had come seeking escape and had found a purpose. He had come to outrun his ghosts and had, instead, learned to live with them. Their voices no longer accusations, but quiet reminders of the man he now chose to be. The mountain held its breath, and this time, Elias breathed with it, a slow, deep, and peaceful sigh of release. He was not lost. He was found.